and UNESCO APIA office are co-hosting the webinar series on Maritime ICH. This webinar is part of the expert meeting for Building Network on Maritime ICH, which has been organized by ICHCAP since 2018. Due to COVID-19, we switched the meeting to a webinar this year. It is sad that we cannot meet in person. However, I think it is meaningful because the webinar can reach out to more people around the world without physical barriers. The theme of the webinar is Maritime Living Heritage, Building Sustainable Livelihood and Ecosystems in the Asia-Pacific region. Yesterday, we met 5 cases under the theme of traditional maritime skills and knowledge for inclusive social and economic development. Today, we will meet another 5 cases under the theme of traditional maritime skills and knowledge for environmental sustainability and resilience. Before we start with their presentations, I would like to welcome Ms. Yeon-soo Kim, the Director of National Research Institute of Maritime Cultural Heritage, to deliver her congratulatory remarks. The Research Institute co-hosted the first expert meeting for Maritime ICH with ICHCAP in 2018.
Hello everyone, my name is Yeon-soo Kim, the Director of the National Research Institute of Maritime Cultural Heritage. I would like to congratulate the UNESCO ICHCAP and the UNESCO APIA office on holding the webinar series Maritime Living Heritage, Building Sustainable Livelihood and Ecosystems in the Asia-Pacific region yesterday and today. I would also like to thank the presenters for their insightful case study presentations. With the importance of environmental conservation for sustainable development being emphasized more than ever, this webinar series on the marine ecosystems and the accompanying maritime intangible cultural heritage will be a welcome opportunity to learn from the wisdom of maritime communities about sustainable livelihood and intangible cultural heritage safeguarding in this time of crisis. The National Research Institute of Maritime Cultural Heritage had partnered with the ICHCAP in 2018 to host an international symposium on the Maritime Silk Road. We would like to thank and congratulate the ICHCAP for hosting such meaningful seminars annually for the safeguarding of maritime intangible cultural heritage in the Asia-Pacific. Once again, I congratulate and thank the organizers for successfully organizing this year's webinar series and look forward to a more active exchange with experts around the region for the safeguarding of maritime intangible cultural heritage in the Asia-Pacific.
Thank you, Director, for your warm remarks. Now, I would like to introduce Mr. Pham Phu Ngo, the Director of Hoi An Center for Cultural Heritage Management and Preservation in Vietnam, for his congratulatory remarks. The Hoi An Center co-hosted the expert meeting on Maritime ICH last year in the beautiful city of Hoi An.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Hoi An Center for Cultural Heritage Management and Preservation, I would like to thank the International Information of Networking Center for the International Cultural Heritage in the Asia Pacific region under the auspice of the UNESCO ICHCAP for inviting me to deliver the congratulatory remark for the webinar on the Maritime International Cultural Heritage, with the theme is the Maritime Living Heritage, building sustainable livelihood and ecosystem in the Asia Pacific region. For the past few years, ICAP has been recognized with effort in organizing many the seminar of the expert meeting for the building network on the maritime international cultural heritage, and to promote the exchange research within community in the region and all over the world throughout the maritime international cultural heritage. Going toward for sustainable development goal for maritime international cultural heritage for the community, culture, and region. In 2019, I got partnered with the Hoi An Center for Cultural Heritage Management Research to conduct a seminar, Maritime Traditional Belief and Practice, in Hoi An City, with the participants of the many researchers experts in Vietnam and in Asia Pacific region. This seminar had many valuable scientific discussion of the maritime traditional belief, practice, knowledge contribute to preservation, promoting of the maritime international culture heritage of Vietnam, in particular the Asia Pacific region in general. In addition, the outcome of the seminar has impacted and improved our understanding of maritime international culture heritage researching in Hoi An. Due to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, you must hold the webinar series. I hope that the researcher expert will provide the new scientific information of traditional maritime skill and knowledge for building sustainable resiliency and ecosystem, as well as the rule awareness of marine ecosystem of community, especially the safeguarding of the sea and island sovereignty of the Vietnam, in particular, culture, region, and the world in general, toward for sustainable development in the future. I wish the webinar a great and success. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. Before we have the session started, Ms. Ellen Leka from UNESCO APIA office will be joining us today to deliver her presentation on the social and economic impact of COVID-19 in the Pacific. She is a cultural officer in UNESCO APIA office, and I think her presentation is very special because COVID-19 is still affecting our lives tremendously in almost every aspect. Also, it took 4 months for her indeed to come to the APIA office as the COVID-19 blocked the sky. Ellen, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I'm just going to share the screen. I hope you can hear me well. Good afternoon to everyone from APIA. And thank you very much, ICHCAP, for allowing me to be part and contribute to today's discussion. Also, it has been a pleasure to collaborate and co-organize this webinar with you during the past months. And of course, it's an honor to be part of this distinguished list of panelists and speakers. I believe that this is a fantastic opportunity to talk about intangible cultural heritage beyond the limits of the convention and acknowledge the importance of living heritage to communities, but also its role when addressing broader global issues such as climate change and food security. I will be mentioning such issues later on in my presentation. I have prepared a very simple, aesthetically simple presentation, but I believe that what I'm trying to convey as messages are information that I received through my very few months working with the APIA office, And in the Pacific, as you mentioned, Minji, I just arrived, and it took a very long time due to the current circumstances to bring me to Apia. What really introduced me to the situation in the Pacific, specifically in relation to the COVID crisis, was the involvement of UNESCO with the joint UN exercise on the socioeconomic impact assessment of COVID-19 in the Pacific. And this assessment is broadly based on the 5 pillars of the UN framework for the immediate socioeconomic response to COVID. But from UNESCO's perspective, what we looked at was mainly the 5th pillar, and that is the social dimension of the impact. And in addition to that, what I tried to do was to look at this, the social impact, through a cultural lens. As you know, in the Pacific, communities follow formal but also traditional governance systems, and COVID affected perhaps not so much with the healthcare system, as there were very few cases in some of the countries, but it affected people's lives through the access of goods, services, and support. And this had a social, economic, and cultural impact. The aim of UNESCO in this assessment was to provide qualitative and quantitative diagnostics on the impact of COVID, both on social cohesion, but also on community well-being and resilience. We also looked at how to identify post-pandemic recovery needs to ensure social inclusion through cultural participation, and also to strengthen the cultural and the creative actors and sectors of the Pacific. So what we did was defining these terms. For social cohesion, we defined it as a sense of collective identity and belonging, mutual support, social networks, safe spaces, as well as local heritage, tolerance to difference, and cultural diversity. And both individuals, community, and institutions play a role in fostering social cohesion. In terms of the community resilience, we defined it as the ability of community to overcome, recover from, and adapt to disruptive events such as disasters, climate change, and so on. But obviously also COVID is such an event. They do this, communities do this through using their collective resources, which are human, cultural, political, and so on. When we were defining the methodology for this process, we definitely took into account the UN Declaration of Human Rights, specifically the Article 22, which refers to cultural rights, but also Article 27, which is related to free participation in cultural life. We also took into account the UNESCO 2030 cultural indicators, and the questionnaire that we developed, we circulated it and received inputs from different sections and units of headquarters, specifically related to our discussion today, the Living Heritage Unit of UNESCO. So what you'll see on this slide on the bottom part is a part of the questionnaire. What we tried to do through the questionnaire was looking into both social cohesion, but also the impact of COVID on institutions that are involved, and our main stakeholders play an important role in safeguarding and protecting heritage, but also assessing the impact of cultural employment. So the impact of COVID on the creative industries, on people's livelihoods that are related to the cultural sector. And the data was collected from a very diverse sources, which included, definitely newspapers, social media, but mainly surveys that were done face to face. And I think this is what differentiated it from other surveys that were done at the same time. We worked for quite a long time on this, from May to September, but we covered all 15 Pacific SIDS, and the result is a very bulky selection of reports, but at the moment we are actually working on a more user-friendly and engaging version of it, which will be in the form of a policy brief and infographics with a country-specific focus. In the Pacific context, where social and cultural participation and inclusion, sense of belonging are underpinned by the maintenance of relationships within families and communities, and they are activated through life cycle events, which were obviously impacted by COVID and the different restrictions. There is a sense of place and access to places of cultural importance, and there is a need to feel the ability to share and participate in life, in events, and access to gardens, land, and sea, which is actually demonstrating the intimate and embodied relationship with environment. Many of these elements sits at the heart of cohesion and act as safety nets. So we saw similar trends throughout our surveys in the different countries. So in the bullet points are some main conclusions that we drew, and that is that in the Pacific SIDS, there was strengthening of social cohesion as families and communities came together during the restrictions and lockdown, and they, in a sense, renewed their bonds. There was definitely a return to rural areas, specifically for people that lost their jobs or had limited or reduced hours. We also saw how social and cultural participation are essential to the Pacific well-being and form the backbone of kinship and kinship relations. And this is seen in the emergence of stories of families and communities that started building on self-sufficiency and therefore started turning to agriculture or traditional food production, but also the solidarity economy that we saw in the Pacific in terms of the revival of the bartering system. The picture you've seen on this slide is actually from the response or part of a response from Palau. And the interesting thing with the survey was that many countries actually identified positive aspects to COVID. So for example, in Palau, there was the importance given and value given to elders and the recognition of their role in transmission of living heritage even by the Ministry of Community and Cultural Affairs. And what they did was during the lockdown, they established an internet service that was called Meet and Greet, and they would do this once a week, where elders would have the opportunity to pass on information to younger people in the community. Or for example, in Fiji, there was a revitalization of the Solevaki practice. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but this is basically means, or loose translation of it means that people working together towards a common aim. And so this practice was revitalized, and there was a return to traditional lands, in some cases led by youth, and who were returning to villages, and they were farming collectively and providing support to families that were in need. Um, there are a lot of examples through this survey that I can bring up. I've just put a few responses on this slide. I can also mention a few others. In Kiribati, for example, there were traditional communal events such as rethatching of village, Maneaba, that continued, and elders and chiefs have been involved in decision making as was their norm. Some communities have also taken the time to reorganize themselves and to be less dependent on tourism, because the main impact has been the economic impact on the tourism industry, and also being less dependent on the cash economy. So as I mentioned earlier, the bartering system has been on a rise, and we've seen samples of this using Facebook or other social media platforms to do bartering. I would like to close with a reflection on how all this data and information collected can be channeled to support innovative investment and ensuring that communities are at the center of the recovery efforts. This is definitely an opportunity to build back better, to take the opportunity of the positive aspects that we have seen and try to support them in future activities. As I mentioned earlier, one way of doing that from our side, from UNESCO APIA, is making this data available, making it available for decision makers and for people that are in place to support and really ensure that communities are at the center of the recovery efforts. But I believe that in the discussion today, in a way, I'm preaching to the converted, because we all know and we all believe in the transversal importance and contribution of intangible cultural heritage to development. And we are aware of how knowledge and practices are transmitted from generation to generation in areas such as agriculture and food systems and traditional medicine, natural resource management, and ecosystem services. And all this contributes to various SDGs, such as food security, SDG 2, or SDG 3 climate change, or SDG 13 healthcare, or gender equality, or decent work. And so what is now required from us is to advocate for the importance of ICH beyond the limits of the convention and the culture sphere, because we can see the important contribution it has throughout the development goals. So with that, I will just like to thank you, and I look forward to the discussions that are to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ellen Leka, for your opportune and meaningful presentation. Now, I would like to move on to today's session. The theme of the session is Traditional Maritime Skills and Knowledge for Environmental Sustainability and Resilience. Professor Soledad Dalisay from University of the Philippines, Diliman, will serve as the moderator today. Before we get started, I would like to have a little announcement. If you have any questions during the presentations, please type them into the chat box in your YouTube control panel. We will also have time for questions at the end. Also, you may download all the papers from ICHCAP's official webpage under the ICH webinar series menu. Now, without further ado, please welcome today's moderator, Professor Dalisay from the University of the Philippines. Professor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Minji Kim, and good morning, everyone. For this second session of the webinar series, we will have 5 distinguished speakers from the Asia Pacific region who will be sharing their knowledge and their insights on how living heritage, or rather on the role of living heritage in enhancing environmental sustainability and in attaining resilience. Each of our speakers will have 15 minutes for their presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Is Dr. William Jeffrey of the University of Guam, who will discuss the coastal cultural landscape of the Yap and marine ecological conservation. So, Dr. Jeffrey, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my... So thank you very much for the invitation and being able to participate in this important event. Sorry. I'm going to talk about the maritime or the cultural coastal landscape of Yap and its connection with marine ecological conservation. So where is Yap? Yap is in the Northwest Pacific, and I put here a map showing its context with the Austronesian migration out of Taiwan about 5,000 years ago. In the top right-hand side, you'll see Yap bounded by this red line. This represents the Federated States of Micronesia, and Yap is one of the 4 states. I'm going to talk particularly about the small volcanic island, which has a coastline of about 100 kilometers long. The Yap state comprises many coralline islands, which extend for about 400 or 500 kilometers towards Chuuk. So it's part of the Micronesia. There's 5 countries associated with Micronesia, but Yap is part of the Federated States of Micronesia, one of the independent nations in Micronesia. You can see the others there associated with Polynesia, Melanesia. So I like to start off with talking about, this is my favorite subject, essentially, this context with the fisheries with Austronesian cultural heritage and identity. And I put here a list of what's recognizable, some of the features and the language, the dwellings, the Peter pottery. And I like to see that, I like to always put forward how fishing and the fisheries, which extend right across this Austronesian area in the Pacific and Oceania, is an important part of the heritage and identity. As Peter Bellwood mentioned, sorry about that. Peter Bellwood mentioned in his reason for why Austronesians moved out of the Taiwan was because looking for favourable environments for cultivation and sheltered inshore fishing. And so fishwares, fishing practices, the intangible cultural heritage are an important part, and they should be recognised more, and I like to put it forward that they should be recognised as an important part of the cultural heritage and identity of Austronesians. So Austronesians were therefore very accomplished seafarers. They established trade and tribute networks throughout the whole of Oceania. And the Yapese were similarly a part of this. They established a good trade network through their outer islanders, and also with Palau, where they quarried these stone money discs. About 13,000 now of these stone money discs in Yap. So they were quarried from about 600 years ago up until the 1930s. And they transported them in traditional canoe and raft for 450 kilometres from Palau to Yap. They have a very strong connection with their, well, they want to maintain a strong connection with their culture and history, and they do this through a number of things. One of them is through dancing and chanting, where they use dance and chants to commemorate events and their ancestors. Here's a stick dance with the young people out front of a stone money bank. And I was in Yap for a number of months and saw many impromptu chants like the older men here did one night time. So let's move on to the fish weirs. So this is the high volcanic island area where the fish weirs are. The green represents the 4 islands, volcanic islands. And you can see the white area surrounding the islands. That's the reef flat. The blue dots represent about 450 of these fish weirs, and you can see an example of one of them there. So it's an excellent area for these tidal fish weirs, and I'll get on to how they work. But just to introduce, there are 420 species of fish and about 168 species of hard coral in Yap waters. There are many traditional cultural practices associated with the fish weir practice, starting with the fact that the Yappies say that the spirits that came to Yap and roamed around Yap in the form of men. 7 of the early fish weirs were built by spirits that were in the form of men. One of them was in the form of an eel. And they showed the Yappies how to build these fish weirs, to build them so they would be sustainable, and also to build them so that they would catch fish in a sustainable manner over a long period of time. So they had a connection with the marine environment, the marine ecology, right from the beginning, from the sort of time of the spirits, showing them how to build them. Some of the other cultural practices here show a falu, a traditional meeting house. These are being renovated. There's quite a few of them now. This is where young men would gather for their offshore fishing, but they would also build fish weirs that were nearby for fish that they could then eat. So there are cultural practices associated with them where they would catch the fish, they would be able to eat them, but they would sort of pay tribute to the owners of each atch. Every atch is owned, this is the traditional name for the fish weir, are owned by someone, and they also the village chief, that they would also give fish to the village chief. So there are a number of cultural practices associated, and just a nice shot there of a traditional pathway through the jungle of Yap. So this is an illustration from an aerial photograph of a tidal flat area. So here the water would come right up to the coastline, right up to the beach. So you can see the longest one there is probably about 80 meters long. They're made of small basalt rocks. Not just small, but they could range from rocks that are about the size of a football, a basketball, through to quite big boulders. And so when the tide comes in, the fish come in. And as you can see, there's seagrass, sea meadows where fish are grazing. When the tide is falling, the fish are moving along, and that shaft that goes out from the coast, it stops fish from moving away. It directs fish into that big arrow-shaped chamber. And then you can see a smaller compartment where the smaller fish can get into. So it might take a couple of years to build, say, that big one. You can see there's 2 others, and around this point there's about 5 or 6 of these arrow-shaped ones close to the coast. This is another section of the reef flat. You can see 2 of them together, and you can see that the arrow is actually not symmetrical either side of the shaft. That's because fish come from up above, come from where the longest part of the arrow is. And this helps direct fish into the trap with the shaft, in the trap, the compartment. So it might be passively fished, where the fish people just let the fish go in, or it could be that the fish are herded in there by Yappies people. So in our survey that we did in 2009, 2010, we documented only about 430 of the 800. And we found in the 45 we did intensive surveys about 12 different styles. So they related to where they were built, if they were close to the coast, like the ones with the middle shaft, and also the one here with the 3 together, that's close to the coast. And then the ones that didn't have so much the middle shaft, like the one over here, it's actually further out on the reef flat, I have an illustration to show you. This one here is quite an interesting one, where it's actually a fish pond, but still in the shape of an arrow, and I'll get onto that. So the fish pond is actually, there's no direction by the shaft into the trap. It just, the tide comes in, the fish come in over the wall. When the tide drops, the fish are trapped there. There's no, it's more like a weir, and the others are more like traps where the fish are directed into a trap. But we like to keep them, calling them as weirs for simplicity's sake. This is another one on the other side of that small island I showed you before. This, you can see, you know, the long side of the arrow is this side. This is where the fish are coming from. The shaft is actually not perpendicular. It goes out at an arc. So this is dependent on the current, the tide, which way the current is coming. So this has all been sort of worked out by Yappies. So the shape and positioning of the fish weirs are influenced by the local geography, by the direction and strength of currents, by the marine ecology, by fish movement, and the ownership of the reef flat, because every bit of the reef flat, it's been parcelled up just like on land, and is owned by an individual or an estate from the village. And each fish weir, each atch is owned by maybe someone else. It's quite a complicated system. So from an outcome of our work in 2010, we were told of one particular atch, how they built a small hut over the trap, over the compartment, and this would have been built high enough so high water didn't wash the fish out. And so this sort of stopped the sun from cooking the fish, also now enabled a guard to sit under shade. But the important thing about this one shows how a Yappies is opening up the atch. And this is the point, the arrow, the back of the atch, they call it. And I was told a nice saying, a terrific saying, let fish come and go to make them feel at home. So they might catch fish for 2 days when the whole thing is closed. They can still get through these openings here, either side of the shaft. But then they would open up when they don't want to catch. And so this is part of the sustainability of it. And so fish can come in, you know, breezing around, eating, and then they can go out. They make them feel at home. So when they actually then get trapped, it's a big surprise to them. So as I said, they're actively and passively fished. This is one further away from the coast. It's built and incorporated a blue hole here. And also down the bottom, you can see how the wall, this is the wall here, a very wide base with a narrow top. At the top, the rocks are vertical. This allows the fish to come and go as well. Also, they built it like that because the water can pass through, so the water's not hitting and breaking it down. So they've studied the whole marine environment and marine ecology. They're actively fished where people are involved in herding them into the trap area to take them out. I told a really nice story of a guy behind this atch here, and he was scooping them out almost as quickly as they were coming in. This is some early photographs of active sort of herding around an atch, and then a passive sort of method where they use a weir basket to collect the fish, or the Yappies guy with his canoe. So the maritime cultural landscape, which is essentially the atch landscape of Yap, reflects a Yappies cultural identity through this harmonious and sustainable manner in which people have interacted with the natural and spiritual world. So those red dots represent about 450. Still another 200-300 to map. So you can see virtually how the whole of the island has the fish weirs and provides this cultural landscape. So this landscape can be both landscape and seascape. We're very familiar with landscapes like another Austronesian group of people, the Balinese. They manage the ecology of the rice terraces in a harmonious relationship with the natural and spiritual world. Well, Yappies and other areas in Oceania, they managed inshore fishing in a similar way. in a harmonious relationship with the natural and spiritual world. So I like to emphasize that, it's not just landscapes, but seascapes that have been very important and effectively managed. And a nice little saying I came across for another group of fish weirs off Penghu in Taiwan: the sea is their field and the fish is their crop. So atch fishing was a sustainable fishing practice using traditional ecological knowledge. Yapese people studied fish movement and spawning aggregations when locating atch on the reef flat. And atch fishing involved many customs and cultural practices. And this is just an illustration on the right here, showing the coastline and how the coastline's divided up. There's the name of the village, and there's underneath the village name is the different types of fishing that can carry out in those areas. So with the decline in fish stocks, because of unsustainable fishing, they've declared 4 marine protected areas. And this is mainly managed by the villages. It's not sort of state run, national run, it's done by the villages. So they are using traditional ecological knowledge to some extent in the management and in the construction of their MPAs. We know from scientific evidence fish stocks have fallen by 50% between 1950 and 2012. And the reasons being overfishing, also degradation of the marine ecology, the environment. The outcomes could be further decline in the marine ecology and in human health through micronutrient deficiencies. Communities, especially the island communities, Oceania, really depend on fish for a staple, also for their micronutrients. We know, this is rather a messy map from this article in Nature, but it says, it states that fish could fall another 20% in those equatorial areas. So to finish off, can traditional fishing practices using a traditional fish weirs help in this conservation effort and have a role in various United Nations SDGs? And I believe it can. It can inform how to catch fish sustainably and in balance and harmony with the marine ecology. Traditional ecological knowledge can inform how to conserve the marine ecology today in association with MPAs. And we know from 21st century science that there's a higher biodiversity in fish weirs. This only confirms what Indigenous science, Indigenous people already knew, that there was a high biodiversity in those fish weirs. And there are other SDGs that where the fish weirs and the traditional practice could have applicability. I've highlighted them there, as well as in cultural tourism, where local residents control and benefit from. And lastly, Yapese, I know in Penghu and other areas, they've wanted to revive this traditional cultural practice because it helps to revive a community spirit. And we see how this is quite important at times of stress like we see now with COVID. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey. I found it quite interesting that we also have the same fishing tradition here in the Philippines, the use of the fish weirs. And I'd be very much interested to explore further whether there are also similarities in terms of the social organization that supports the practice between the Philippines and Yapese. So for our second speaker, we have Ms. Seomjin River of the Ministry of Ocean and Fisheries, the Republic of Korea, who will present the Korean National Important Fisheries Heritage System for Strengthening Sustainability, a case of the handnet fisheries system for gathering marsh clam in Seomjin River. So everyone, please welcome Ms. Seomjin River.
Hello, my name is Hyunjung Jung, and I'm working for the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries in South Korea. And my division is fishing community and port development. Yeah. Oh. Thank you. Port development. I'm charged of enhancing the local fishing community through the supporting the fishing and maritime tourism. Well, oh, no, not yet. Sorry. Well, actually, today I want to introduce one of our policy. It's very important to keep the ecosystem of Korea fishery sector. So we call it KIPS. Next page, please. Yeah. KIPS is a Korea important fishery heritage systems. KIPS are breathtaking landscape that combine fishery biodiversity, resilient ecosystems, and the valuable cultural heritage located in specific sites around South Korea. Our policy is to identify KIPS and their associated landscape, fishery biodiversity, and knowledge systems. Also, and Korea government want to promote that system to the public, how it is important to our ecosystem and to our local fishing community. Of course, definitely we want to preserve and keep our heritage system as it is. Maybe some of you may be familiar with the concept of KIPS, because we adopted that concept from the GIAS, globally important agricultural heritage system of FAO. Many nations have the similar system to protect their own heritage system, but every nation puts the fishery sector under the agricultural sector. But we all know that fishery sector has the distinctiveness, uniqueness, and also difference. Ministry of Ocean and Fishery want to focus on that distinctiveness to help the fishing community resident, and we want to implement the customized policy for them. So KIPS is one of those policies, and so far we had 8 KIPS. Those are the list. Next, please. Maybe the photo will be better explanation of the KIPS. It's a woman diver in Jeju, and it's a lobster farming on the south area, and it's a special boat on the mud. And also it's a sun-dried salt industry. Yeah, looks very funny. Yeah, it's the same industry. And it's the marsh clam. So it's the way of gathering the marsh clam. It's a bare hand octopus catching on the mud. Yeah, well, I want to explain all of the KIPS is very unique and special to me, but due to the lack of the time, I will show you the 7th KIPS. The name is the handnet fishery system for gathering marsh clam in Seomjin area. I'm sorry to cough. The handnet marsh clam fishery, which takes place in the brackish water zone of the river's estuary, is Korea's representative traditional inland fishery that continues even today. So let's see the video clip first. Yeah, it's a Seomjin River estuary. Well, actually, marsh clam inhabits only in the clear water. That is the reason the marsh clam disappeared in South Korea. As you already know, Korea had experienced very rapid growth, economical growth. That means we destroyed a lot of inhabitants of marsh clam. But only the Seomjin River's residents keep the river as it is. that's why they are the largest marsh clam production area in South Korea. Well, let's move to the 1 minute and 17 seconds, please. Yeah. Let's see how to catch the marsh clam. Yeah, you see the tool? Well, can you stop it? I'm sorry. I'm sorry because this video clip is a little bit long. I want to show you how the local people keep the ecosystem. This traditional fishery is of significant historical and relative value in that it is a unique fishery knowledge system created through a prolonged collective experience of the river's residents. Furthermore, repeated marsh clam gathering through the use of the tool is beneficial to the circulation of the aquatic ecosystem and the maintenance of biodiversity in the river. It's very easy. When the fisherwoman scraped the bottom of the river with the tool, it can make a circulation. It's very virtuous circulation. In short, the river gives the resident food and a way of living. And also, the residents give it back to the river, the clear inhabitant. Yeah, I think it's our ancestor live with the nature, live with the ecosystem. Can you move to the minute 2? Yeah. Yeah, just to look at how it can be gathered. Yeah. Oh, so sorry. Yeah. This tool is called korengi. It's called korengi. Its tool consists of a steel net and a bamboo shaft. And with the use of it, we can make some circulation and we can catch the marsh crab non-motorized way. Of course, it will help the ecosystem of Seomjin River. And I want to show you some food we can make with the marsh clam. Can you move to the before that, it's the ancient times tool. Isn't it surprising that the modern tool is the third portal? The first portal is made 100 years ago. Just the material changes only. The shape is almost the same. That means our ancestor has the wisdom to develop the tool in the best way for the ecosystem and also their living. Well, let's move to the last part. Yeah. It's almost lunchtime. Maybe you are hungry, and the marsh clam is the Korea's favorite food. So we can make a lot of things with that marsh clam. Let's move a little more. Yeah. That's a good. Well, actually, it's the process of how they process the marsh clam and make some food with it. Very, very ecological production system. And also, can you move? Yeah. Yeah, it's the marsh clam soup. It's really yummy, I'm guarantee. And if you have any opportunity to visit the southern area of Korea Peninsula, I ask you to try that food. It's really delicious than it looks. Well, I want to tell you a lot more about the marsh clam, but I don't have much time. So I want to emphasize why we want to keep that heritage system. Next page, please. Yes, as you see on the video clip, this fishery system is more than a livelihood. The local doesn't run the cooperation and the maintenance of their own living with that. And as you see, most of fishermen are women. Normally, the fishery work is very hardworking, so only men can work in that area. But that kind of heritage system does not want hardworking. It's for our mom and our sister. And also the system connecting the past and the future. We learned how to live with nature from our ancestors, and also we will teach our descendants how to live with the nature. And also in a modern view and as a prospective government officer, it suggests a new fishing community tourism. Currently, people enjoy the nature as it is. They highly evaluate the nature as it is, I mean. So just to experience that kind of fishery system, it's very easy. As you see, it will help them and to enjoy the nature. Lastly, it enables the sustainable fishery system and the autonomous management of that area. Well, actually, that's why the Ministry of Ocean and Fishery keeps more promoted our policy to the public. So if you want more next page, please. If you want more information about our system and the other KIPs, there are 8 KIPs in the list, so you can visit that site. I'm sorry we don't have English version, but if you copy and paste on your address window, you can find a lot more. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Seomjin Jong. I'm sure after the short video on the marsh clam soup, everyone now is eager to try it. So for our third speaker, we have Dr. Dedi Supriyadi Aduri of the Indonesian Institute of Science, and he will be presenting voicing culture after nature, traditional knowledge, and marine resource management in the Sulawesi Islands. So everyone, please welcome Dr. Dedi Supriyadi Aduri.
Thank you, moderator. Good day, everybody. I don't know where are you located, so better say good day rather than mentioning specific period of time. As mentioned by the moderator, I would like to share you a story about the maritime cultures of the Sulawesi Islands. I use the title as voicing culture after nature because I'm putting this discussion in the context of Coral Triangle initiatives. Which is dominated in its narrative by concerns on ecosystem biodiversities, or they call it ecoregions. I would like to see how actually culture can contribute to the efforts on conservations, nature conservations, particularly in this regard. Coral reef. I would like to present this presentation first as an introduction, and after that would like to tell you some examples of maritime cultures, which I call it as a part of the maritime diversities in Sulawesi Islands. I would like to mention specific examples in this context, and then close by some closing remarks. So let's start with the talk about Coral Triangle initiatives. As I believe you are all aware, so this is a collaborative initiatives of 6 nations, 6 countries to conserve the area, the regions, they call it coral triangles. That's the center of coral reefs, the center of the global coral reefs ecosystem. So it's not talking about only the 6 nations, but they're talking about the need of using these ecoregions as a effort as a global effort to conserve our natures. Yeah. If you look at the narrative, particularly in the websites of Coral Triangle initiatives, we can see that the dominant narratives are concerns on biodiversities and ecological regions. You can see that the area and inside the red rectangle there is the focus of my talk here. But let's start with what we can see or what we can read in the dominant narrative of Coral Triangle initiatives. We can see here, for example, the narrative is concerned more on biodiversities, talking about how many coral reefs, how many coral species, how many mangroves and other sub of marine ecosystem in that particular regions. This is another example focusing on Indonesian, particularly in Sulawesi, what they talk about when they are talking about this area. Here, for example, some maps showing reef diversities in the Indonesian ecoregions. This is the diversity of reef associated with stomatophore. So that is it. If we look at the formal narrative of the Coral Triangle initiatives, or in terms of conservation, in the conservation of effort of Coral Triangle initiatives, the things that they miss, I believe, which should have been done when they're talking about conservation, is to talk about the people. The same area is the home of maybe millions of people, and some of them are maritime-oriented ethnic groups, such as the Bajo, the Sangihe in the northern part of Sulawesi, the Butonis in the southeast part of the islands, and the Butonis, yeah, the Selayar, this one, and the Butonis. And these people, which is commonly we call it as maritime-oriented people, or orang laut, orang maritim, has established a very intimate relations with the sea through their belief system, their traditional knowledge on marine ecosystem, and traditional fishing practices, as well as traditional resource management. These are some rather detailed examples of these traditions. If we talk about orang Bajo, the sea nomad, for example, around the Sulawesi Islands, there are quite a lot of sea nomads population, or orang Bajo's populations. And we know well, actually, if we are talking about maritime culture, they are the real owners of the culture. They are among those limited people who spend 24 hours on the sea. Still, there are still some common Bajo people who are living on the boats like this. Some are already settled, but still in the sea. There's established settlements on the shallow waters of the coastal area. And this is another example of the settlement in the sea. So they established, houses constructed under coral reef walls. Now, let me talk about the second example, that is the Orang Sangir in North Sulawesi. So, or Sangir Talaut. So these people, just give you some examples, establish a kind of a traditional marine tenure. They don't claim ownership to a particular coastal area, but they establish a kind of zonation system, zonation-like system, where, for example, when they are fishing for demersal fish, they tend to do it only in their coastal area only, their settlement area. Only certain area where they considered as shared fishing grounds, where people from different villages can join fishing, and in fact protect their area together. So this maps showing the names of the fishing grounds adjacent to their islands. This is a second example. If we are just talking about the traditional marine resource management, this particular people also establish traditional resource management through the practicing what they call it the tradition of seke maneke. That is the tradition of harvesting particular a small pelagic fish which come seasonally to their area. So once this particular fish come into their fishing grounds, it was arranged by their tradition. This fish only can only be caught using this traditional fishing gear, and they so they establish a kind of system where particular group of people associated with particular fishing gear, this seke gears, can only fish in certain fishing ground. Let me show you. This is, for example. So the group that is called potash group, they can only fish in these fishing grounds. So there's a traditional regulations pertaining the allocations of fishing ground to particular fishing groups. So this is the organizations of each of the groups or seke maneke group. So they have the leaders that is called Tonasang Pakuete, which is considered as the most knowledgeable person, not only in terms of the ecosystem, natural system there, but also has quite a strong or powerful spiritual power. Then they appointed other people to be in charge for certain functions for the effectivity of fishing for that particular fish. Yeah. Another interesting issue is, again, unlike the modern management system, where the distributions of the catch is usually only for those who take part in the fishing activities, in their traditions, the share of the catch also given to other part of the community members, such as elders or widowers or teachers and other prominent leading figures in the communities. That is one example of the traditions. The other tradition is what is called as EHA. That is the tradition of closing season for fishing activities in certain fishing grounds, usually lasted for 1 year. So they establish this tradition in particular fishing grounds. So they identified fishing grounds, put names on that, and then implemented the tradition of EHA. That is the closing seasons lasted for a year. The harvesting tradition is called manee. So if EHA is a closing, manee is the harvesting of the closed area for fishing for a year period. So usually there's, again, rituals and particular social organization in charge to take part in or arrange the ritual of harvesting the fish after being closed by EHA. Then in the tradition of Manee, they open it. This is some pictures, sorry, not so good pictures taken from YouTube film. So it's where they prepare, yeah, the equipment for harvesting. This is coconut leaf, whip, and then used as the driving gears to drive the fish to the coastal waters, and then corner it into particular area, and then they harvest it. It started by local leaders, ritual and other thing, and the community then take part in the harvesting of the fish. This is another example from Selayar. So Selayar people, by traditions, they establish kind of community-based coastal management. So they establish the claim of management right to the coastal area adjacent to their villages, and they establish some zones in that particular coastal waters, and they establish a marine protected area in this area. And they also, outside of the marine protected area, they establish certain regulations of fishing practices. For example, this is similar to what Bill explained in Micronesia, Polynesia, fishware. They call it, what's it? They call it, oh, I forgot. I have the here bila. They call it bila. So every sports associated with this fishing gears, or they call it bila, is owned by a private family. So other family cannot put the wear there. There are 56 spots of wears there, and exclusive for particular family members there. And there's a prohibition of destructive fishing and other regulations pertain, which is not only based on their concerns to the sustainability of the resources, but also their concerns on fair distributions or potential distributions of the catch. Again, this is something that we understand not properly addressed in the modern tradition, a modern management, coastal management, or fisheries management, concern on social welfare, community, community-driven, incentive to work together doing the management. This is the last example from Buton. They also established a communal marine tenure. That is the claim that they have the right to manage the coastal waters adjacent to their settlements area and associated with the traditional organizations of that particular community. So they have already, they also, identified different sub-ecosystem, put name on that, and establish different regulations pertaining to the use or even conservation of that particular territory. This is another detailed regulations applied in their coastal waters. For example, Kaombo Sauru is permanent nautic zone area. Kaombo Awaktu, the area regulated by opening and closing seasons, such as the tradition implemented in other parts of Sulawesi. And also the area where they are allowing people to fish for sustainable use, or fish using traditional fishing gears. They have also a kind of traditional committee in charge of controlling or implementing all the regulations that is applicable to their coastal waters. So to close this presentation, first I should say that diversity is not only for natural ecosystem but also socio-cultural system, and then this is important if we consider that the ideology and the practice of conservation based on ecocentric conservations where community and people are excluded, and in fact it was mostly considered as threat to the ecosystem. Does not work, particularly in Indonesian context, because that is the life of so many people. That's the place or resources where thousands of people depend their life on. And also the fact that actually if the conservations implemented top down, there's not enough resources from government or other institutions, even with the support of NGO, to really implement the regulation. So getting in the community on board is something that is necessary to establish a sustainable conservation or with sustainable governance of the marine ecosystem. Socio-cultural system have been observed contribute positively to the conservation and the management of natural ecosystem. I explained earlier, and traditional knowledge and resource management are assets that should be valued like the natural ecosystem. Again, I would like to highlight the importance of incorporating these practices, this knowledge in the design of conservation as well as management. Thus, sustaining marine culture is not only a matter of cultural heritage, but also conserving the nature and dealing with food security and, of course, the social fair of the natural resource management and the distributions. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Dedi Cipriadi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Steve Percival of the Tiapapata Art Center Incorporated in Samoa. And he will be presenting a paper on the Palolo fishing canoe. You have the floor, Mr. Steve Percival.
You are the mute, sorry.
Sorry, thank you, Sol, and thank you also to all the previous speakers, and also to UNESCO APIA and to the South Korea ICH organizers. Thank you. Before we start, I'd like to play a short video clip which captures the story that I'm about to tell you, to do with the building of the traditional Samoan fishing boat, and also the fishing for a delicacy, which is known as the caviar of the Pacific. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you. So I'd like to thank Denisa Manyaskova from the Czech Republic, who is a filmmaking colleague working here with me to help document the making of the Samoan canoe. I'm going to share with you the screen now that will show you the presentation that I'd like to run through. So the building of this canoe was done in a very short period of time. But before we start looking at that, I'd like to just touch on the context. And on this slide, I want to highlight just one thing, and that's the fact that 81% of the Samoan population, which is around 195,000, live in rural villages, which means they don't have a very high employability situation because of the fact that this is one of the recently elevated countries to developing status. But for most of my lifetime, we've been a least developed country. The oldest site of human occupation dates to around 3,000 years ago, and we're known as the cradle of Polynesia, has a very rich natural and cultural heritage. Unfortunately, with contact with the foreigners, we were first a German protectorate and then a New Zealand protectorate. But then finally, after much struggle and loss of life, the Samoans were able to gain independence as the first Pacific Island nation to do so. With the foreign contact, though, there's been considerable change to the way Samoans look at the world and interact with the world through the foreign cultures, mainly European, through Christianity, through the shift to a cash economy, and perhaps most devastating is the change to a foreign diet away from the traditional diet. Quick run through the glossary. A tufunga is an expert craftsman who usually is a boat builder and a house construction expert. The matua faiva is also another designation, and this is to the person who has the highest expertise. He's also known as the companion of the kings because he's one of the only people who can sit with the king in traditional Samoan society. Va'a is a generic term for all boats, and the pao pao is a particular term for the outrigger canoe, which we will be examining. There were in fact 4 traditional boats made in Samoa before contact. Unfortunately, all other 3 boats are no longer made, and a lot of the knowledge associated with those boats has been lost. A few years back, 1996 actually, a group of people who were very interested in Samoa's voyaging past managed to rebuild a va'alo, a small outrigger canoe for fishing, that had a planked wood construction. And that one is now, I believe, in a museum in Germany. But there's been no other attempt since then, since about 30 odd years ago. So it's very sad that we see the loss of our intangible cultural heritage in this marine culture. The expert that we have been documenting is a 71-year-old male from the village of Sanapu on the south coast. It's a very remote rural village. He's a master craftsman, and in fact, he and I led a team of house builders to Japan last year from September to December, and we built a traditional faletele, or a meeting house, at the museum, the Little World Museum of Man in Aichi Prefecture, near Inuyama City. The big city next to that is Nagoya. Lisa is known in his village to build at least 1 new canoe every year. And that sometimes displeases his fellow villagers who don't build the canoes. He built 2 in October this month, 1 just before the Pololo rise and 1 just after. He's assisted in this work by his adult son, who's 37 years old, and 3 grandsons, 17, 11, and 10. Now, with an extensive knowledge of the natural environment, Lessard very clearly demonstrated that he's more than just expert in his craft of boat building and house building. He's a keeper of indigenous ecological knowledge, and he knows the forest inside out. He refers to the forest as his shop, his store, his warehouse, where he goes to collect the materials he needs. He therefore knows also some rituals that serve to protect that forest in order that he can sustain his work into the future. He's a warden of intangible cultural heritage, comprising knowledge systems and know-how that are not learned in any classroom setting here in Samoa. As an example of his knowledge, he very quickly spouted off to me some 21 species of trees that were used or that he mentioned in connection with the work he undertook. There were 8 species for the main body of the boat, 4 for the boom, 1 species, which happens to be an invasive species, I need to ask him what the traditional species was, that attached the boom to the booms. And then for the fishing nets, there were 2 species of tree or shrub that were so supple that they could be bent into an oval and hold the net. With the paddle, he had 5 species that he could make paddles from, and he chose 1 for this project. For the work, he uses an adze, and there was only 1 species that he says is the preferred species throughout the archipelago. So his tools, including a chainsaw, were an axe, a European style axe, and then the traditional hafted steel adzes. There were 2 varieties, a straight edge and a curved steel adze that was used on convex surfaces, on concave surfaces. There you see the much older stone adzes. Now I want to touch briefly on this because this is an example of how traditional ecological knowledge and traditional intangible cultural heritage has been lost. These stone adzes, and there are literally thousands around the world and many thousands here still in Samoa in the soil. So they were made not long before contact with foreigners began from oceanic basalt. Lessard, along with many other people that I've interviewed and researched the subject on, had no knowledge of how these stone adzes were made or how they were used. Now the one in the photograph, in the lower part of the photograph, that's the biggest adze I've ever seen and handled. It's approximately almost 3 kilograms in weight, has over a foot long or 310 millimeters, and has a shaped blade of 80 millimeters. Lessard could not tell me how these were used. I want to touch briefly on another aspect of traditional knowledge that's slowly being lost. The 2 legends associated with the origins of the Palolo both involve war, in one case with the coral and earth creatures, and the other with fish and fish and birds. In both cases, the fish seem to have lost the war, and the worms, in the first case, the earth creatures lost the war, and the worms were the Palolo, and they were allowed to rise to the surface twice a year. Seasons of the Samoan calendar are very clearly defined, but knowledge of this is also being lost. The trees that were used for this boat, we have the tamalingi, which is in fact an invasive species. And here we saw, and we managed to record the last remaining vestige of the ancient rituals associated with tree felling. Lessard would immediately instruct his grandson to cover the tree stump. And he said, this is to protect the boat from cracking apart. So here we have a little bit more of the construction process and a few photographs to illustrate that. And as I said in the beginning, he produced this very, very quickly. Created this boat in a matter of 3 days. And the 4th day was just finishing and testing it. We see the grandchildren who are learning from their grandfather. This shows you the boat in an illustration that I made from the design that he crafted. And in this slide, you see that in the 1920s, a Maori anthropologist, his boat that he recorded was just 1 inch shorter. Number of proverbs were collected in this work, which you can refer to later. And then to conclude, just the digital video and digital images that have been recorded will be produced into 2 short films and an educational book. So thank you. To close, again, I'd like to just show one more video clip and mention that Samoa is one of 10 Pacific islands that do not have COVID-19 infections, and there are only about 12 in the world. Thank you. Jessup?
Lewa pa ule la au fa mo sale ya so mi ole lewa ko sila mai ya wa o saya ngai ya so ya ma teni parasi ole le la au fa mo sa ya ma ngau fufi lo le ponga la koko ye ngau fufi lo le ponga ke la ufisili lo nga pola le mafuanga ole el mafuanga le fufi ai ke mele ole pa ole la ke mila pa ko ole ngadwen ya ole famoi moi ngale ole ai nga funga mai ya songa o mateni e ole fa wawa mako mrisila la ko la ko yu fi mal ngani mi ya ko se sila mal maari ya ko kile mai lo ye ko penga fa nga ko le menga nga o uri malua ai fa nga po le ale wale uko kanga ima ya ye de ko ni mele ai mole de ma eu kal ko ngo ku pulanga ngi e vai ka wala ko le ko e no kele o kilo ni me sa fa nga ko ni kele au ko inga ya wa fa ilangi fo long sa la ko fa nga ngi me wa ko kili mai lo e po le ale ma lo si o ye ko inga ka sa ye.
Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much also, Steve, for that very interesting presentation on the Palolo. And for our last, but of course not the least presenter this morning, we have Dr. Aline Delaney, who will be presenting her paper on mitigating threats, expanding opportunities, maritime intangible cultural heritage of Matsushima Bay, Japan. And Dr. Delaney is with the Center for Northeast Asian Studies, Tohoku University in Japan. So let's welcome Dr. Delaney.
Okay, thank you everyone. It's my great pleasure to be joining you, especially because I initially contacted the organizers just to participate as an observer, and then I was invited in. But the consequence of that means my talk is a little bit later in planning than everyone else, and I'm focusing more on kind of the big picture issues rather than like a specific case study in a lot of really close detail. So also, yeah, I'm a native English speaker. Sometimes I speak quickly, and maybe the organizers will speak up if I'm speaking too quickly for people. So again, yeah, my name is Aline. I'm a cultural anthropologist, And I'll give a brief introduction to my work in coastal areas, and especially with intangible cultural heritage. I'm focusing on the Matsushima Bay, which is the site of my long-term field site, and also looking a little bit about these landscapes we find in the marine areas. Similar to a lot of the talks today, I work in fishing communities and with fishing households, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then from my research there, I'm just bringing up, since I'm talking about concepts, higher level concepts, I'm only bringing up 2 examples of these cultural rituals and ceremonies related to the sea, and also some native concepts on humans and the sea coastal area interactions. And then touching briefly a little bit on resilience and try to bring it all together. So, okay, so I've been going back and forth to Japan for decades now at this point. I've just recently returned in the past couple of years to Japan full-time. Unfortunately, with the corona outbreak, I was stuck on the wrong side of the Japanese border, and I was in Europe for the last 6 months, but I'm finally have been allowed back in and can focus more on the research. I've always looked at coastal commons and resource rights, but as a trained anthropologist working in ethnography, I've always kind of looked at the broader picture of things. And so it's really nice to be able to focus on intangible cultural heritage as a way to kind of tie in all the different things people have talked to me about. Yeah. So some of these cultural practices I'll talk about. And then also, because I've been working for a few decades now in the coastal community, I'll look at social sustainability and resilience. I've interested in these topics because of the long term. And I just want to make sure I'm not muted. Sorry, people were waving, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't muted. And also because of the way things are changing, an elderly population. I'm sorry, can people hear me? Okay, I just hear people.
Yeah, you are audible, Dr. Lee.
All right, someone was talking in the background, so I wasn't sure if they were trying to tell me they couldn't hear me. Yeah. All right. So also this area of Japan was hit by the tsunami in 2011. So my resilience and social sustainability aspect is now growing a little bit more, I guess, a little more importance now, seeing what has happened since the tsunami hit. And then also my more recent research is also looking at human-sea interactions and how this has changed and what does this mean for future generations as a result of the tsunami and the massive seawalls that are being built. And then just very briefly, just to give some more background. So I've been in Europe for 17 years, looking mainly at fisheries management, but I was very pleased right before I was able to come back to Japan. I was awarded a Horizon 2020 grant looking at maritime and coastal cultural heritage. But I feel like one of the things I was able to bring was to really focus on the importance of the intangible heritage, which I think often, especially in Europe, tends to get overlooked. All right, so the area I've always done my research and I'm focusing on here is in the Tohoku region north of Japan. And then within Tohoku, I tend to look at Miyagi Prefecture. And then in Miyagi, I'm talking about the Matsushima Bay. Now, the Matsushima Bay, this is a very biologically rich area. The coastal area, you have a northern current and a southern current coming in. So it's very, has more diverse species than you find in other places. Also, this part of the coasts in the southern region is very sandy beaches, shallow, and the northern area is very mountainous with rias. And the consequence of this is kind of the point where it all comes together. So it's very, very diverse in species and therefore also in the capture methods and the way people interact with the resources. And the region itself is a very lengthy and rich history. The Jomon period from at least 6,000 years ago, there are midden mounds and And we can see from historical artifacts that people have been interacting and living in these coastal areas for thousands of years. And what we see in the landscapes, kind of reflects this long-term, people being there long-term. All right. So in the paper, I just very briefly allude to kind of social ecological production land and seascapes. And basically, these are the land and seascapes we get from people working together and living in the area. And it actually comes about in these satoumi areas. And satoumi is a Japanese concept where these are areas where the biological productivity and biodiversity has really increased through human interaction and action in the area. It's very similar to what we see in the UK, for example, looking at hedgerows or the cork forests of Portugal, right? So it's through the human interaction that actually the biodiversity has increased. And also, as what was presented earlier, like looking at the weirs, right? So it's this human interaction which helps increase the biodiversity. In Japanese, sato means the area where people live. Like when you say your hometown, it's furusato, and umi means the sea. So basically in this concept, what they're referring to is it's an important sea area, which is kind of been supporting culture and cultural exchanges, throughout history. And a lot of this comes through, of course, through the fisheries. And in in contemporary terms, we might think about Western scientific knowledge, and these areas are really socio-ecological systems, right? So they're including the environment and human beings. And also, interestingly enough, it's also been defined in the Western and scientific knowledge terms, saying that these areas have to have some sort of subsistence circulation, has to include the ecosystem, and then we add the contact with people and activity spheres, right? So it's kind of a native concept, but it's also can be described through Western science as a socio-ecological system. As I mentioned, I'm looking at fishing cultures. I originally, of course, was interested as someone coming from outside in the commons and this management system. And I was fortunate when I began my research that there were still people around from who started fishing before World War II, people born in the Meiji Taisho period. So a lot of my early ethnographic interviews were working with these elderly retired people who were able to kind of give me a background on how things were done and how things had changed. For example, in the Matsushima Bay, they suffered quite a bit. The island area and the landscape is protected as a quasi-national park, but the mainland side is home, as you see throughout Japan, to very dense populated cities. So there's been a lot of marine pollution and degradation. And so I was kind of looking at how fishers were able to work in the face of this environmental degradation. Also, for example, since the tsunami occurred, more than 90% of the seagrass beds have been destroyed. And so when you talk to people about their, how things used to be, it's also being moved into helping rebuild in the future. All right, so in talking about these ethnographic interviews, when I conducted them a lot, and also when I lived there for several years nonstop, and now that I'm back again, I've really also focused on some of the cultural activities that took place, kind of highlighting people's interaction with the sea, or events that have occurred because precisely they're living in the coastal zones. And two of them I'll just briefly highlight are the Minato Matsuri, which literally means port festival, and the Hama Obon. Hama means beach, and Obon is, it happens in August. It's a part of the Buddhist tradition when the ancestors return home and are welcomed, and then they're sent back again. Now, the Minato Matsuri is interesting because now it first began publicly in 1948 as a way to kind of revitalize the fishing in the area in the post-World War II period. But it's been interesting as I look back historically at how it's changed. Now it's a very large tourist festival, and they've now changed the dates of it to coincide with national holidays. But it has in its roots this Shinto, native animist religion tradition where the kami or spirit god from the shrine, which is interred in the shrine, is put into a portable shrine and brought out into the community. And for the port festival, it's also put onto a boat where they have a flotilla of boats. And what they don't highlight in the current tourism literature is actually this has an older tradition where, of course, the spirit, the god is in the portable shrine and brought out. But then it was also, they would make stops in my field site where I work, and also to stop at an older shrine with documented history of more than 1,000 years. And so there's this close interaction that comes back, from their cultural history. And now with Hama Obon, I also brought this as an example because it's in the Buddhist tradition. And it's specifically for, it's held just a few days after the more societal's more common Obon, and it's held specifically for people who have died at sea or by drowning. Of course, family members who've had people die will represent the family, and they send the spirits back. But it's also held for people who are complete strangers who had washed up on the shore. So it's kind of a festival which ties into this broader sociocultural way of thinking systems, but also it's specific for the coastal area. And then so just so in addition to the ceremonies, just two concepts. One is Sato Umi, which I've already briefly talked about. And I think it's important to highlight that the term itself is relatively recent in the literature. There's a lot of research done on it, but the practices are actually century-old customs, right, from the years. So even before there was a term, Sato Umi, of course, we had these landscapes and these areas and these practices going on. I also wanted to highlight with Sato Umi that it's very tied closely with fisheries. Of course, it's the fishing activities which have helped form the landscapes, but also, so in the fisheries management, it's the local fishers who share responsibility for the management and conserving resources. So for example, there's many marine protected areas in Japan that are actually set up by fishermen themselves and not imposed from above. They themselves recognize the importance of protected areas for not only their livelihoods, but for the resources and the biodiversity. And then the concept is also recent, like Sato Umi, but we have these fishermen forest movies, Yomin no Mori. They really took off in the 1980s. There's now an NPO, a fisherman further north in Miyagi, where I work. He started the Mori wa Umi no Koibito, which literally means the forest is a lover of the sea. And really they highlighted this older practice of understanding how the mountainous areas and the trees, so basically the watershed, have a great importance to the quality of the coastal area and then the marine resources. I won't go into what I also have here about volunteerism and long-term sustainability, but basically the point is this movement's really taken off. You see like more than 1,000 different activities going on around the country, but there is a difficulty with the long-term sustainability of the practice. And then just to tie in, I know I'm running out of time here, but resilience. So I was thinking about kind of these overlying concepts and the actions of the people and how it fits with biodiversity and resilience. So I would just highlight again this management, co-management system the Japanese have with the coastal small scale inshore fisheries, their system of operating. They have the local ecological knowledge. They set up marine protected areas. So this is very important. And in fact, there have been case studies that have shown combining the Sato Umi concept with this co-management is really helps bring in also conservationists in with the fishers. You don't always have the conflict you might see in Europe in a lot of places, right? They're brought together. And then just to conclude, I wanted to highlight that Japan is an aging society. It's very high. Going to get higher. And the risk to intangible cultural heritage, especially in the marine area, is extremely high. I myself have seen it in the 25, almost 30 years I've been going back and forth. But also there are some changing views of the sea. We have a rise in some environmental movements, such as beach cleanups and plastic waste campaigns. Especially the photos I have on the bottom of the screen are from habitat restoration, seagrass seeding, and you get a lot more rise in sea-related recreation. So on the one hand, we have lost and we're losing kind of coastal and maritime intangible cultural heritage. And at the same time, there's also a rise in bringing in outsiders, because today there's a fewer people who have direct connection with the sea in their daily lives. And so it's really important to try to reconnect people with the sea. In addition to trying to preserve the intangible cultural heritage, but we can also bring in new people and maybe even start new intangible cultural heritage in the future. And I think that's really important for coastal resilience and for sustainability. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Delaney. So thank you, distinguished speakers, for sharing your knowledge and views on traditional maritime heritage, particularly among the Yapese, handnet fishing for the marsh clams, traditional fishing techniques in Indonesia, fishing boats among the Samoans, and lastly, IMCH among coastal residents and fishing cooperative associations who work and live in the Matsushima Bay region of Miyagi, Japan. I was amazed at the extent of shared heritage we have in the region, particularly the fish weirs, festivals, women's roles, as well as the role of tourism on the sustainability of maritime cultural heritage. At this point, I'd like to open the floor for questions and comments, and we already have quite a few sent through the chat box. So if I may start, the first question, I believe, is for Steve. Is there some kind of business in creating the boats out of the trees? Is it legal in the country? And do you think it will lead to deforestation? Steve, may respond.
Thank you. No, we're talking about very, very small scale industry here, micro industry at the village level. So the craftsmen who build these boats, they tend to use an invasive species. And this invasive species is a big problem in Samoa. It's replacing a lot of the native trees. So where they used native trees in the past, they now have this invasive species, which is their preferred timber to make the boats. So to answer your question, it's not illegal. It's not a big industry. We're only talking about some 300 villages throughout the islands. And in each village, there might be 5 tufunga who build boats every year. So there could be every year, maybe 1,000 trees, but this invasive species is just taking over the landscape. Is there another part to your question? No, it won't lead to deforestation. In fact, it'll be a little bit helpful if we were able to control the spread of this invasive species.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I suppose you were able to cover all the points raised in the question. So the next question I have here is, I believe, for Yung Jong Jong. Miss Yung Jong Jong. So what are the changes that KIFs have made to make sure that fishing is kept safe amidst the pandemic?
Hi, as you know, the Korea government applied to the COVID-19 very safe way, and also a lot of tourist means. I mean, it can be harmful to the tourism. Because if many visitors went to the area, it can be infected by COVID-19. So Korea government makes some rules people should wear a mask always and keep their hands clean. But with that personal policy, we can keep our nature as it is. And also the resident of the place agree to limit the number of tourists. Of course, the income of the tourism goes down after COVID, but the best thing is, since then, Korea gets some fame that the word of cleanliness. It's really important, even though the money from the tourism and the money from the tourism can goes down shortly, but in the long run, if we keep our nature as it is and we keep ourselves clean, we can move on to the better place, I think. Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jong, and thank you also for bringing up the topic on tourism. So the next question is for Dr. Delaney. How do you think has tourism affected festivals in Japan that you mentioned, like for instance the Hama Obon, and has it become a spectacle of sorts, considering the tourist gaze with the influx of tourists coming into Japan to participate or maybe just to witness these festivals? Dr. Delaney.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, the Hamobon is more of a private ritual and activity, and the port festival, the Minato Matsuri, is the big tourism one. It's interesting because I don't know if it's a societal change, but when I first lived there, the festival took place at a different time period, and I could see that a lot of times people then would take off of work, right? Because this is an important activity. And then over the decades, I've seen it change dates several times, and now they changed it specifically to coincide with the national holiday system. And so what we're seeing is it's kind of the shell, right? Just the face of it is then being used by the tourism board, right, to try to bring more people in. And of course, this area of Japan, especially up through the early 80s, Japan was somewhat closed. People couldn't travel out very much and take long holidays. And so it was a very big domestic travel destination. And it was a really core area that people visited domestically. But now with the rise of more international travel, it might change with COVID-19. But with the rise of international travel, the economy of the areas really fell. And in the same area, they also had a shipbuilding, which has also fallen. So they're looking at the tourism as a way to really bring in money. But again, it's this double-edged sword, of course, which you see with tourism. But so what they're incorporating then, I think, is really just kind of these superficial aspects. And maybe oftentimes that's all tourists need, right? When we go to various places around the world and we see a show by the local peoples, it's also just the kind of the brush strokes that they are being presented to people. But on the other hand, it's also important because it is the landscape and the seascape that is a big draw. It's important then for them to focus on maintaining, like limiting the amounts of pollution and impact by people on the area, because that's also what the draw is. I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully.
Yes, perfectly. Okay, thank you, Dr. Delaney. So I suppose the next question is for William. Yeah. The question from Facebook is, are there new fish weirs being built in Yap? And for the new ones, if there are any, for maintaining them, are there new techniques for maintaining them, I suppose?
Thank you for the question. No, there are no new fish weirs outside of the 800 being built. So they are reviving and trying to revive the master builders to teach younger people to maintain the existing weirs. The 800 relates to a far larger population in Yap, probably 20 to 30,000 people when the fish weirs were, the 800 were, maybe they're not all being used at once. So there's plenty there. Some of the ones that are being revived and restored, there's only about 20 or 30 of them that's being carried out. The rest are not being used. We tried in the project that I did, tried to encourage people because they see these as traditional techniques and traditional fishing practices using traditional ecological knowledge and therefore sustainable. So they're not wanting to create new ones as such, but just to revive some of the current ones.
Follow up to that question. Is the extraction and use of the materials sustainable?
So the stone that they mainly use, the basalt rock, some of it can be sourced by the coastline. The ones further out on the reef flat are coral and with some basalt. So it's it's not sustainable to build new ones, and I think to rebuild the 800 is not sustainable either because of the coral that's needed or the basalt rock. Maybe there's some melding of what's there, down to sort of 400 or even 200 or 300 are used. I mean, the issue is that they're all owned by individuals and they're on another estate's land, even on the reef flat. So it's an interesting dilemma. They're not therefore promoted for tourism as such. The canoes, the stone money, they have a traditional Yap Day, it's a weekend in March. They're the things that are promoted for tourism rather than the fish weirs are more for local people and their own use.
Okay, thank you. Last for Dr. William, are there adjustments that have been made on the traditional construction of the weirs to accommodate the new normal, so to speak, in terms of hazards from the environment?
Well, that's been part of the problem and why there's been a resurgence in interest. A few years ago, maybe 20 years ago, a number of them were knocked around by a big typhoon. They get typhoons occasionally. So if they're not maintained because of the typhoons or the storms, they just lose it. You can't use the fish. So some of them are being revived and reused. And I think, maybe a few hundred, certainly not several, 800 will be revived and reused again.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have one question here for Dr. Dedi. Are there clearly set criteria for traditional or non-destructive fishing tools and methods as stated in community fishing rules? Are motorized boats considered non-traditional?
Yeah, usually destructive fishing is associated with blast fishing and sided fishing. So all fishing techniques associated with these two things are considered as destructive fishing. On the boats, on the motorized boat, it depends on actually more on the both sides rather than the engine. And also certain locally developed criteria. For example, diving with torch and underwater torch is prohibited by local standard because for tourism it was associated with too effective for fishing fish schooling. And the second one is considered as not socially fair because other people other fishers, usually local village-based fishers, use more traditional gears such as line fishing and other gears that is more selective in terms of catching the fish. So local criteria also apply based on local agreements. More or less like that, the regulation.
Thank you very much for that response. I suppose the next questions that I'll be raising right now may be answered by anyone or everyone, if anyone's interested, or several of you. Like, for instance, the first question that anyone can answer is, how can the maritime industry maintain sustainable livelihood for people? Also, what should people do to contribute in sustaining it? Who's ready to respond to that question?
I can start if I may.
Yes, Dr. Deddy, please.
So, okay, the one initiative that is quite interesting, it's being implemented or at least tried out in Indonesia, is connecting these traditional practices with the what I call it as a green market. So this traditional fishing practices is linked to the demands of global demands, international fish trade, yeah, which required better or sustainable fishing practices from the community. So through this marketing chains, people are encouraged to do better fishing practices in one hand, but at the same time, they are also given a kind of incentive by giving a premium fish price to this community, to these fishers. That's one example. The other example is the threat for these traditional practices is either free commercializations as well as the threat from government imposed modern regulations which does not fit with the local regulations. Yeah. So now there are several NGOs working with the communities to kind of formalize these traditional practices in the form of village rules, for example. This kind of codifications and formalizations at the village level gain more power to be then recognized formally by the government at the higher levels, by which then they get a kind of legal protections. That kind of initiative are being also implemented in Indonesia, particularly in eastern part of Indonesia. That's my response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deddy. I suppose we'll have to go a little bit over time for this session because we still have several questions here. They're very interesting. I feel that the audience found your presentations very, very interesting. So we have several questions and they want to hear your answers. So I hope it's okay with everyone. So another question, I suppose William can respond to this and the others as well. How should we prepare our next generation for AI or artificial intelligence? I suppose this is artificial intelligence. AI challenges in the maritime industry.
Yeah, it's a very good question. How do we? What's the challenge? I think to try and maintain traditional cultural practices that have an association with tangible heritage and intangible heritage, and I think the need to revive community spirit and community solidarity is important. I know in YAP. They're wanting to extend the marine protected areas, and they're looking at using traditional knowledge to help in that sustainability. And I think I don't know if you can get that from artificial intelligence. So the sort of continuation of maintaining this connection with traditional cultural practices using tangible and intangible. And community spirit, community solidarity is a way to help counteract that AI
Thank you, William. Any other member of the panel would also want to respond to that? Stephen?
Yeah, so I'm on. Last week after the canoe building, I went down to film one of the grandsons who was, his class was actually reenacting rituals of the Samoan people, welcome ceremony, which is a very interesting ceremony. And I asked the teacher afterwards about this teaching of a cultural practice. And he said that the problem today is that many of the young people are not exposed to the traditions and culture that his generation and the generation before had exposure to because of globalization, because of the fact that, you know, a lot of these children now have smartphones, even in rural Samoa. So they're being exposed to a global society which is eroding that intangible cultural heritage that their ancestors had. And I agree wholeheartedly with William that I think that there's definitely a need to relink people, I guess, with their roots. And this is one way of meeting the challenge that could come from an otherwise very robotic pillage of the resources. Because, you know, already we know there's overfishing, and the best way to protect the fish stocks is to make them out of bounds so people cannot fish them. And I think this is something that the traditional societies knew with the kinds of tapu or taboos associated with these practices. So we need to have the wisdom that the ancestors had to deal with the challenges that we now face. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other point of view you want to raise?
Can I just add to that?
Yes, please.
I think an acknowledgement, I think that traditional cultural practices, indigenous science is as good, or has been in the past, as what we see now as 21st science. You know, we now are using science so much, and we should. But indigenous people used, you know, observation, experimentation for hundreds of years, you know, in developing their practices. So an acknowledgement that this is still very important, as equally important as 21st century science.
Okay, thank you. So I suppose whether AI is a boon or a bane to maritime heritage is another topic for another webinar, considering where our millennials are right now. So the next question, anyone can answer this as well, but probably Aline and Dr. Ms. Yoon Young Jong could also respond to this. We understand the importance of maritime assets and traditions to tourism, and the focus has been on conservation. But how is maritime culture and sustainability practices being propagated, transferred to the next generation? Is it also being done in this time of COVID? So anyone can answer. Yes, Ms. Yoon Young.
Yeah,
might want to start.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Well, actually, sustainability should be done by cooperation. I think the cooperation is a really important factor. For example, Ministry of Ocean and Fisheries listed the handnet fishery as a KIPS, but since then, a lot of people visited the Seomjin area, the largest marsh clam production area. The problem is the marsh clam is really scarce resources. So the local government wants some limitation on the catch, but the local resident does not want, because many people means money for them, for their living can be better. So they discussed about the point they talked about the best way to keep the resources. over and over, and they reached the conclusion that there should be a limitation. Of course, the tourism income went down, but the name of the place, the Seomjin, means to the great to the Korean people. It means some freshness and cleanness, and every Korean people think Seomjin local people already try to keep the nature as it is. It means any product, including fishery, of course, any product from Seomjin area gets some premium on their price because it made in an eco-friendly way. I think it's from the cooperation from the local residents. In that way, I think the Seomjin River people can keep their heritage system as it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I suppose this next question can be answered by everyone in the cultural context that you just presented. So how can the maritime industry maintain sustainable livelihood for people? I mean, we understand that there are efforts coming from the government, non-government organizations, but from the people themselves, what should they do to continue in sustaining the maritime industry? Maybe we can start with Dr. Delaney. Then we have Dr. Aburi, we have Stephen, and Young-jong, and Bill. Okay.
Thank you. Just to follow up on your question, so what can who do to maintain?
What can people do to maintain the practices from the people's side?
Oh, yeah. Well,
what efforts should they be?
Japan can be termed a post-industrial society. So I think some of the problems we have in maintaining are a little different than maybe the other cases, but it could be a warning of where things might be going. In Japan, the problem with maintaining is so much of it is this graying older population, and also the issue you have with the fisheries. I mean, traditionally, people have access to resources from living in the coastal community and being a member of the fishing cooperative, right? So as you get a declining, as the numbers of people who are active are declining, it's very difficult for newcomers to come in because being resident is an issue and being an outsider is an issue, because there's this widespread fear and really belief deep down that outsiders won't take care of the resources in the same way as you do because you are doing it because it's been given to you by your ancestors, right? So in terms of what they can do, they need to maybe liberalize a little bit how they educate in schools to get people interested in the sea, and then be a little more open to let newcomers coming in. There's a few initiatives going on now, but it's still very small. So I think that's the biggest challenge they face in Japan in trying to sustain this in the future, is because actually the traditional caretakers are in decline and they're not open to outsiders coming in and taking over the responsibility along with them.
Okay, thank you. I think Ms. Leka from UNESCO would also want to respond to the same question.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that question, because I think it is really an important issue to be raised. From UNESCO's side, as you know, this falls under the implementation of the 2003 convention, which is on the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage. Within the implementation of this convention, what we are trying to support the member states in doing, and the state parties of the convention, is to do inventorying of their ICH, to build capacity in safeguarding intangible cultural heritage, but mainly to really support the community engagement, because as you saw from many of the presentations today, it's really the communities that are the bearers of this traditional knowledge, and are the ones that make sure that this is passed on, which leads me to the last one, which is the transmission, especially the intergenerational transmission. This is knowledge that goes back centuries. Many of the panelists made reference to this. It's knowledge that has developed through many years of interaction with nature, being able to cope with the different challenges that nature is presenting them. So it is different indigenous coping mechanisms, but also ways of living with nature, drawing from it in terms of traditional medicine, in terms of ways of constructing houses that are resilient to climate change, in terms of the fishing techniques that you have been presenting. So I think through this convention, and for the Pacific, I can say that almost all countries have ratified this convention and now are in the process of implementing. Many of those countries are now focusing on how to start the inventorying process, which is definitely like the first step in this. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you. So going back to the same question, can we have Bill? How can communities, the people themselves, sustain maritime cultural heritage?
Yeah, I go back to this community spirit. I know, just to go back to the fish weirs, a reason for the decline that was put forward by a major author of a book, 600-page book, was about the decline of fisheries, was that the loss of community spirit. And I think a big part of why the Yappies want to revive them is to revive this community spirit in general, not just for the fish weirs, but I think, you know, as we've advanced in time, we have machines that take over and do a lot of the things that communities would do together. We need to get back to that community spirit that, for in general. I guess that's my short take on how we can try and maintain sustainability.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Anyone else who would like to share insights to answer that question? Well, I suppose everyone is ready for lunch. So we've gone over time. We've had a very interesting session this afternoon. I'm sure there are other questions, but I suppose they can contact ICHCAP. The audience can contact ICHCAP for other questions that they have, and he can relay this to the various panelists. So at this point, I'd like to turn over the floor to Ms. Minji Kim.
Thank you, Professor Soledad Delizy, and thank you everyone for enthusiastic discussion session that we have. I appreciate everyone for joining this webinar series today and also yesterday to make some closings. For 2 days, we met 10 cases from all over the Asia-Pacific region and heard voices of coastal communities. With facing global urbanization and climate change, the livelihood of coastal communities are threatened along with their intangible cultural heritage. However, at the same time, their wisdom can offer insight for a sustainable future. In this regards, we would like to keep hearing voices from the communities and gathering their traditional knowledge by networking and sharing information. Thanks again for joining us for 2 days. And I should say that the webinar series of ICH will continue. You can find the detailed information on our webpage for the presentation files or even contacts of the presenters. Please join the ICHCAP community on Facebook and YouTube, and you may subscribe to our newsletter and magazine to get the latest news and share ideas. I hope to see you all in the future. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minji. Thank you, Sol.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.